no, seriously. Mark is, without a doubt, one of the most preeminent scholars, authorities, collectors, dealers, and he runs the Todolena trading post on the Navajo Res with his fabulous wife, Linda. When he's got nothing else to do than run around all over the world researching textiles. So I have had a blast working with him on this exhibition, as has my team, and we are thrilled and honored to have him back tonight to a sold-out crowd. So thank you for coming, and without further ado, Mr. Mark Winter.
Thank you, Davison. So anyway, I kind of gave myself a little introduction last night, and I'm going to repeat it just because there's more people here, and some same faces, some different faces. But anyway, what am I doing up here? The one that has to talk about all this stuff? Well, I got out of high school, and I went to a flea market the first summer I went out of high school, and I found a turquoise and silver bracelet. This isn't it, but that's what it was. And I bought it. And I just really liked it, and I had a few friends, and they liked it, and in the late 60s, we started going out to the Navajo Reservation and buying old pawn out of the old pawn shops, hitting every dirt road we could and everything. And I was also a bit of a craftsman. I did leather work and woodwork, and I set up a store selling my crafts in what's called Idlewild, California, in the mountains. And one day, a traveling trader from Zuni, I still remember his name, Wally Prince, came in, and he was going to sell me some jewelry, but he said, oh, by the way, you should look at these. I just got them in Palm Springs, and he brought in 7 old Navajo rugs. And we put them all over the floor of the store, and they looked so beautiful, and he just saw I couldn't stand it. And so he wanted quite a bit of money, and I didn't really know what they were worth or even what they were, but I thought they were beautiful. And with my running on the reservation, I'd see contemporary rugs, but I'd never seen old rugs. The old ones were really cool, I thought. And so anyway, that day, Wally Prince left with every penny I had, and I ended up with 7 old Navajo rugs, and I basically say it ruined my life. And so I set to find out what I'd really bought, and I bought a few books, and I went to a couple of museums and things like that, and started trying to find out, and one thing led to another. A friend of mine from Idlewild came over to see me a week or 2 after I bought the rugs, and of course I was in love with them. And he offered me what I paid for all 7 for one, and it wasn't my favorite one. And I thought, oh my God, this is a career. And so I started hitting antique stores all over Southern California and buying rugs and buying and selling them, and I messed with baskets a little bit. The rugs were my real love. And I decided in 1975 that I should move out to Colorado, because Colorado, where there's a lot of big ranches, and all the big ranchers would have bought rugs. It's close to the Navajo Reservation, and so that was sort of my thinking. So I moved out to Pagosa in 1975, and I ended up 2 years later buying my first Navajo classic blanket in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, of all places. And so it was a beautiful Navajo Chiefs blanket, and so that was the beginning of what was called the Durango collection, and I started collecting with H. Jackson Clark of Durango, Colorado. He owned a gallery called Toatin there. He was a 4th generation trader. His family was founding family in Durango. And he liked the idea of the blankets and having them, and he had been a rug dealer for years and years, but the idea of having gold blankets and collecting them, so we started collecting. And we opened our first museum show at the Utah Museum of Natural History in 1980. So that was the first time I curated a museum show, actually. And in that show, I like to say that we had textiles, Navajos in all the different phases, and prehistoric things, and we had Pueblo textiles, but we also had Hispanic textiles, because I was already a fan of those. And so we had both Saltillos and Rio Grandes in that show in 1980. And so I traveled, did shows, did everything, tried to see every Navajo rug or blanket in the world I could, but although I was a Navajo rug dealer, because that's what really sells more, I collected Hispanic, and so a lot of my collection does represent Hispanic things, and so with that, all I'll say is I will try to entertain you a little and look at a few textiles. I, although I try to include a lot of history, I don't really consider myself a historian. And that would be too stuffy for me. I really consider myself a material culturalist. And so I'm really interested in the material culture and what the different weavers in the Southwest did. And so they're very identifiable, and we can easily, identify whether the weaver's Pueblo, Navajo, Hispanic, or Mexican or anything like that. And so there's a lot of criterias, a lot of it's based on history. The most obvious thing I tell people is if a material wasn't discovered and made till 1880, the blanket cannot be from 1860. It's kind of logical, but you'd be surprised the people that show me something and say, my grandmother, had this and it's from 1850. And I'm going, well, ma'am, the dye wasn't discovered that's used in it till the 1860s or 70s. And of course, I get myself in a lot of trouble doing that. But they want to know what it really is, and then they don't. So anyway, what I really wanted to do today to start out, and it may take 5 or 10 minutes, and I hope I don't bore you with this, but I think since all of you are either New Mexicans or favorable in New Mexico, I thought I'd tell you about something that's in the exhibit and a little backstory, because the backstory is it's a phenomenal part of New Mexican history that most people really don't know. And that is the letter that is in the gallery there. And the letter is the official permission from Charles I to Francisco Vasquez Coronado to go look for the 7 cities of gold. It's dated June 11th, 1540, and it's real.
How did you get it? Wow.
Came in the mail. Just 450 years too late. And so I'll tell that story in just a second. But anyway, we had it authenticated by the head document guy, and I was actually in New York for Sotheby's auction, and somebody said, "Did you see that old New Mexico letter over at Christie's?" And I'm going, "No." And they were having a document sale, and I went over there, and sure enough, here's this letter. Now, Coronado spent the winter. He left out of Mexico City in early 1540. He stayed the winter of 1540 at what's called the Coronado National Monument, right at Bernalillo, right above Albuquerque. And while he was there, the winter of 1540, he wrote a letter back to the King of Spain and said, "I am in receipt of your letter of June 11th." And that is the letter of June 11th. So we know he got it. And so it makes it the oldest letter known that was delivered to any land area now known as the United States. And so I ended up trying to buy the letter. I put together a consortium for $100,000, and it wasn't enough. And it's kind of a long, complicated story that I won't bore you with. I'd rather talk about the history that the letter explains, because it's a part of New Mexico. Everybody kind of thinks, Coronado came up and just, settled New Mexico. And there was about a 10-year backstory to that that's really fascinating. And so that letter has a lot of indications of it. So I'm just going to bore you for a few minutes and tell you the story. And so it starts, and so it's kind of a Reader's Digest condensed version of the whole idea. And so sometimes I like to exaggerate, a little bit about the story and stuff. But basically, it's a pretty good story. So there was a guy that sets out from Mexico called Nunez, and it was in the early 1530s or maybe late 1520s. I don't know the exact date. But he sails over to Florida, and he gets shipwrecked. And so Nunez survives along with about 6 or 8 other guys, and one of the guys is a black slave named Estevanico. And so I'm sure some of you know a little bit of this story, but I'm going to expand upon it a little. And so they, obviously want to get back to Mexico City sometime, but, the problem is that Mexico is this wide, right? The United States is this wide. And so they didn't really know the geography. So they decided they were going to head back to Mexico. They went up along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico and ended up down kind of Texas, northern Mexico territory, wandered around. And this was a 6-8 year adventure that they did this, and they really went through everything. They were enslaved by Indians. They enslaved other Indians. It was a real, it's quite an ordeal. There's a really neat book on it. But when they got out of Mexico a little bit, they were wandering around and they ran into some Mexicans or Spanish Mexicans on a expedition, a exploring expedition. And by that time, you know, they had these big beards and everything. And the Spanish were so surprised because these weird looking people spoke Spanish. You know, and so anyway, they gather them up and they take them back to Mexico City. And take him to the viceroy. Now the viceroy is the vice king. He's the head of all of the New World. And so the rest of like New Mexico had a governor, and all the different provinces in New Mexico had governors, but the viceroy, he's the head guy. So they take him to him. And Nunez is kind of considered a hero because he went through this great huge ordeal and everything. But when it comes to Estevanico, his black slave, who was very large, he said, well, you're just a black slave. You're going to go back and become a black slave. You know, you're going back to who you were. And he goes, well, you can't really do that to me. He had been a free man along with all his compatriots, and he probably saved their lives, and he'd done things, and he kind of got used to the idea of freedom. And when he learns he's going to go back to become a slave again, he says, well, no. You can't do that to me. And the viceroy says, why? He goes, because I'm the only one that knows the way to the 7 cities of gold. And that's where it starts. And so the viceroy is dubious, obviously, but so first off, they conquer, and went over this yesterday more, the Aztecs under Cortez. And then Pizarro, who was an underling of Cortez's, conquers the Incas. So fabulous gold, fabulous wealth. So it was believable to the north there were 7 cities of gold because they'd already found great cities of gold. So the viceroy decides to take a chance on this. So he hires a priest by the name of Fray Marcos de Niza to lead the expedition. And so they're going to go up and see if there's actually 7 cities of gold, and they leave out of Mexico City. Well, as soon as they get out of Mexico City, Estevanico announces that he's in charge of the expedition, and he's not going to go, he's going to go ahead with a few of his men, and they're going to survey it, and the rest of the guys can follow. Now, Fray Marcos de Niza was a priest. He wasn't a conquistador. He wasn't a conqueror. So he was a little more timid, and Estevanico kind of had his way. And so let's say Estevanico had less than a lot of integrity. And so he was brutal. He would lead up, he would go into native villages, he would steal, plunder, take anything he wanted, including the women, and he just sort of led an expedition of kind of terror going up. And so, you know, Native Americans had pretty good communication routes. And so before they showed up to the next native villages, they knew what was going to happen. And so he didn't let them down. And so they wander all up through northern Mexico and visit all these. And so Estevanico started taking slaves because he was getting all this bounty and stuff that he wanted to take with him. And so he had people to carry all this stuff for him. And so it was quite an expedition. In the meantime, Fray Marcos de Niza is just kind of afraid of this whole thing. They get to Zuni. They get up to New Mexico. And they get to Zuni. And the Zunis had already heard about this. And so they were ready for him. And so they get to Zuni and they kill Estevanico. Because he was black, he was big, he professed to be a god, and the Zuni said he's not a god. So they kill him. And so as if that isn't quite enough, they cut him up into pieces. And they sent a piece of him to all the other pueblos to prove that he wasn't a god and that he was really just a mortal human. Today, numerous of the pueblos still dance a black Kachina Estevanico. So it's pretty amazing. So this is And so, anyway, Fray Marcos de Niza, who was not the epitome of courage, here's what happens to Estevanico, because he had got to the Zuni Pueblo first and they killed him. He kind of decided that maybe it would be a lot safer to head back to Mexico City and sort of forget the whole expedition. So, one afternoon, the sun is setting, and there's the beautiful red sandstone cliffs and stuff of Zuni. And so he sees those. So he goes back and meets up with the viceroy, and he says, I saw the 7 cities of gold with my own eyes. I saw the gold shimmering. It was actually red sandstone, but became gold time he got there. So that threw everybody into a fear. There's actually 7 cities of gold. Here's a guy that really claims he saw it. So that inspired the next expedition to go find where they really are. So there was basically 3 choices. One was De Soto, who had worked on the coast of Florida, and so he decides that he's the best one to do it, and so he takes off. He takes off on his own expedition to the coast of Florida, thinking he's going to the 7 cities of gold. Now remember, Mexico is this wide, United States is this wide. So he goes up the coast of Florida and kind of following where the early Estevanico and those guys went. And so he actually goes along the coast, and he actually passes the Mississippi River. He passes New Orleans. But they kind of go, what the hell? Why aren't we already across the country yet? Because we've gone so far. The next candidate to look for the 7 cities of gold was Cortez. And Cortez had become, had made the king very good by his conquering of the Aztec Empire, and then he was one of his underlings get the Inca Empire, and so he sails up the Pacific coast, right, and he lands up somewhere in Southern California, and so they take off, figuring the 7 cities of gold is a little bit inland. Well, inland is like across 1,000 miles of desert. So they get across that a little bit, and it doesn't help. They kind of think, well, they can't really do this. So Mendoza, the viceroy, does the shoe-in. So he hires this guy named Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, and he was the governor of the state of New Glacia in Mexico. And so he figured that was a great shoe-in. Well, why? Well, the main reason is Coronado's wife was the daughter of a guy named Estrada. So now, who the hell is Estrada? All right? He's the minister of finance for the whole New World. So every penny of anything that has any value goes through Estrada. And so you got to ask yourself, well, who the hell's Estrada, right? Why does he have so much, clout here? Well, he happens to be the illegitimate brother of Charles I, the King of England. And that's how he got his position. So that is why that Mendoza was so smart to hire him to do that. So he obviously, petitions for the discovery rights for the 7 cities of gold. And so the king pens a letter that gives him the discovery rights against De Soto and against Cortez. Thank you. You want to help me out here? So anyway, I haven't told the story I haven't had that letter for about 6-8 years, and so I used to tell the story a lot, so I haven't. So sorry if I break it up a little bit. So anyway, he gets the discovery rights. That letter is what gives the discovery rights. Now, Coronado leaves in the spring. That letter's dated June 11th, 1540, so it's sent after Coronado leaves. But it gets to Mendoza, and so that's it. He needs that letter. That's the rights to the letter. Now, the document guy that told me, if you look at the letter, you look at the upper right, there's a number 1 on it. And so that letter was sent to Coronado, which we know, and he got in the fall of 1540. But Richard Flint that speculated that it was a letter 2 and a letter 3. And so the letter 2 was sent to probably DeSoto, letter 3 was probably sent to Cortez, who were disgusted. They probably ripped them up when they got them because they didn't give them the discovery rights. And so it's a really fascinating story on how, and so that leads to, you know, Coronado coming to the Southwest. And so it's a kind of a really fascinating story. So sorry if I bored y'all with it. But anyway, so as I said, I'm really a material culturalist, and so what I really wanted to talk about with you was the textiles. We have, you know, and I told the audience last night, you know, I just wanted to show you that I had more than just the show. So let me see that book for a second. I was just going to run through this, and so, you know, the Rio Grande blankets, which is what these are, the Rio Grande blanket refers to the loom it's woven on, and it's woven on the Hispanic loom that we see one of them examples in the chapel over there. And so it's a European treadle loom, and so it's generally referred to as being Hispanic. But it's really not necessarily Hispanic, although it mostly is. It refers to the loom. And so Hispanic was the main one that wove on it, but Navajo Indians wove on them too, especially ones who were enslaved. So there were other people that wove on them, but they're referred to Rio Grandes because of that. And so they were originally referred to as Chimayos in Fred Harvey records in the early 1900s, because Chimayo was the surviving village of the Rio Grande style of weaving. So they were actually referred to as Chimayos inappropriately and spelt Chamalo. And so in the 1930s, Harry Mira, who was kind of the curator of what was called at that time the Laboratory of Anthropology, which is now MIAC, the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. It's kind of my hero for research. He wrote a lot of stuff about early Southwest textiles, and I agree with 95% of what he said. He was really great. And in the 30s and the 40s, he researched the Rio Grande blankets, and he wrote a book on them. And because of a political situation in Santa Fe at the time, the book never got published. But he's the first one that changes the name Chimayo to call them actually Rio Grande blankets. He's the one that coined that term. And so it didn't get published until I think 1985 or 1990 or something. I just remember that I did when the book came out at that time, because I collected Rio Grandes and stuff, I wrote the kind of book report, I guess, on it. Not the foreword, but a book report when it came out. Review, there you go. So anyway, so in 1979, the Folk Art Museum published this book, and they used Harry's term, Rio Grande blankets. And they did a lot of research. They really did their good job, and they researched a lot of different aspects of it. And so I really like this book, and I've loved it. Nobody has done anything since. You know, there is a book. I guess I was involved, so I should know something about it. But anyway, I built a collection for a guy named Larry Frank, which some of you may have known or didn't know. He lived up in Upper Arroyo Hondo, and he was kind of a nutty collector, the absent-minded collector. And I know he's a really fun guy, but he was a little bit nutty. But anyway, I sold him quite a few Rio Grandes. I lived in Pagosa Springs, and I'd come over and sell him a rug, and then sell him a couple of Rio Grandes, and then go to Santa Fe. And so he ended up selling his collection to the Albuquerque Museum, and the city actually bought the collection. And so they did a book. It's called, I have a copy of it here, Wonders of the Weavers. And I get credited quite a bit with selling him a lot of the better pieces in it. So he was an interesting guy to deal with. So in this book, they have a kind of a chronology of Rio Grande Southwest weaving, you know, information. And so I thought I'd just jump through a little bit of it and tell you. And so first off, it says Francisco Vasquez de Coronado explores the Southwest. That's 1540. And then by 1598, the colonization of New Mexico begins under Juan de Oñate. Now, Oñate is most particularly should be remembered because he brought the sheep with him. And accordingly, they sometimes say several thousand. No, I'm not. I think they exaggerate a lot of these figures. Might have been several hundred, could have been more. I don't know. I wasn't there, obviously, in 1598. But sheep being sheep get together, and all of a sudden they propagate, and so the sheep became very prolific all through Mexico, through New Mexico. Obviously, the Navajos got their hands on them, and they started weaving, and so they were very, very prolific. The sheep were called churro, and it's a big speculation as to whether churro was actually a breed or not. I'm kind of against the idea. I think churro was a derogatory name for sheep that had really crappy wool, and since they were brought as food, they weren't concerned with the wool. But if you understand wool technology, although breed is somewhat important, so often is food chain and climate. Now, when they got into the American Southwest, we have a very unusual climate. It's only a couple places in the world, and we get 70-degree temperature, 80-degree temperatures from day to night. So it can be a really nice, 30, 35 degrees during the day, and it can be 35 below at night. And so that climate affected it. And also, there were no predators in what's called the northern Colorado Plateau. That's where our trading post is, up on the Navajo Reservation. So when the Spanish first went there in 1705, they described the grass as being chest high because there was no predators. There was no buffalo or anything. There were predators. So you had an unbelievable food chain, a very unique climate, and that wool that was considered churro, which is down, kind of a down-sounding word, became magical. And so now churro is really highly touted. They're trying to reinvent it. Unfortunately, we, as Americans, kind of destroyed that wool for the Navajos. In part, although churro, whether it was a breed or not doesn't matter, but merino was the prize wool of sheep. The prize sheep of Spain. And it was the death penalty for people to take the merinos out of Spain. And so we only know really in early days in the Southwest, or in which will include Mexico, there was only two small flocks brought. One was to Mendoza for being the really good viceroy, and the other was to Cortez for his conquest of the Aztecs. And we really don't know what happened. We kind of think that Mendoza kept his around Mexico City, but there's no real records of whatever happened to it. And we think Cortez might have taken his to Oaxaca. And that may have spawned a great weaving tradition in Oaxaca, but we really don't know these things. So anyway, I'll go back to the book and give you a little other history. And then we're just going to look at blankets, unless that bores you guys all to death. So anyway, let me just pick another couple dates here that were key to weaving, and I won't have as long a lecture about them. So anyway, in 1638, there was trade invoices from the then governor of New Mexico, that indicate he was utilizing Hispanic treadle looms to make cloth to sell. And so we can tell that by the size of the yardage, because it's, the indigenous looms couldn't make that big of pieces, and he was selling large pieces of cloth. So that's how they kind of assume that. And then, and another thing that we all know about New Mexican history is in 1680, all the Indians gathered together and chased the Spanish out. They had not been that nice to them, and they just decided they'd had enough, and so they literally, it's what was called the Pueblo Revolt. They killed all the priests and ran all the Spanish back down to Mexico. And so that lasted about 12 or 13 years, and in 1693, General Diego de Vargas returned and reconquered the Tano Indians, which were mainly in Santa Fe, and by 1696, they pretty much had gained control of New Mexico. And so, let's see if there's any other interesting facts here about the weaving. So anyway, I I try to tell people that, these early dates we say, 1750 or something, was before they put heaters in pickup trucks. And so if you were going to go out in the Southwest and your heater in your pickup truck didn't work, you needed a great blanket. And because of that radical temperature shift day to night, everybody had them. The Pueblos made them, the Navajos made them, the Hispanic made them, and a lot of indigenous tribes did them too. And so it was just common, everybody would have their blanket. And now a blanket would dictate who you were, especially from a distance. And so since distance is a way of life and guns shoot pretty far, they didn't cross-dress. I'll just put it that way. Because that wouldn't be a safe practice. So anyway, and when I do my slaving talk, we'll get into that a little bit more about that. But so anyway, I bought my early Rio Grandes in the 1970s. I loved them, and I just have gone on and on and on to collect. And basically it's fun. I'm like a coin collector, stamp collector, so I like to fill in all the gaps. And so here, let's start with this one. Now this is what we refer to as a campo, or camp blanket. And these were made a lot for the sheep herders. And so it was a way they could just use up the brown wool. And so this one came from an early Hispanic family outside of Pagosa Springs named Martinez, and I lived there for 25 years. And so I bugged these guys because I knew they had it's in beautiful condition. It's really nice. And it's just all brown wool with a little bit of, beading in the white. But a beautiful blanket, and I'm really kind of proud to have it. And so.
About what year is that, Mark?
Well, this one is not what we'd say dying of old age. And so it's got a merino mix. So the merinos were introduced into the Rio Grande Valley in 1859, and so when we see the merino introduction with the mixing in with the churro, it has to be post 1859. So this would be 1865, 1875, probably. So you can just throw them.
That looks like it had 4 selvages.
Had what?
4
No,
selvages.
doesn't have any selvage. It just is finished tight. It doesn't have actually selvage cords. And what she's referring to of that is that would be a native trait, that the Spanish loom things ended with bundled outer warps. Okay, and they changed, there wasn't a rule to the book, and so sometimes it's just a single outer warp, sometimes it's 3 or 4 warps in. The idea of it is when you're weaving the rug and you start pulling on your weft, if you have 2 or 3 outer warps that are bundled, you can put a lot more tension on them. So when you're pulling your shuttle across, you can give it a lot more pull. And so it doesn't pull the ends outsides in. It also reinforces the edges when it's done too. And so, yes, we're just going to go right in order. So this is earlier because this is churro wool, and this is a beautiful brown and white, just banded blanket. And so this is quite early. This could be late 18th century. It could be early 19th century. But it's a little more designed to be worn. So you have the accent down the back and the big broad bands. And then this is the 2 models that the churros came in, the brown and the white. Now, most every Rio Grande blanket has 2-ply hand-spun wool warp. And it's actually a prehistoric tendency that they did that. So what they did is they spun the warp twice as fine and hand-plied it. Now that plying of the warp gave it a tensile strength. And so that is a trait of a Hispanic blanket. On the slave blanket talks, we'll go into that a little bit more. But you can see the 2-ply hand-spun wool warp. And it was Z-spun on a hand spindle and S-twist. So the twist is always the opposite direction of the initial spin. And so I'll just do this quickly. What's that? Question?
Are there any dyes in that, or?
Nope, this is natural
Color
natural.
of the sheep.
This is just pure sheep color. I'll do this more than once today, but here. So you can see it's very subtle, the accenting of the body, but they were made to be worn. And so this is, like I said, this is quite early. So here's one more. And this one is not in great condition. I will ultimately get it thing, but I like the piece because this was collected by the Taos artist Dosberg. Andrew Dosberg, wasn't it? Yeah. And so I got 2 blankets from him. This is the only one I brought with me, but this is another early brown and white churro wool banded blanket. And so, just to start making a habit, so they were designed to accent the body when worn. Isn't that cool?
Would they sweep the ground?
No, generally not. You know, they learned how to wear them, so they were really good at it. And so, you know, you could just pull it over your shoulder like this and have it like this. We see a lot of early lithographs and stuff of them wearing them in numerous capacities, you know. But generally, they were about 4 feet by 8 feet is a standard size. And so they were quite large because they are, I'll get to you in 1 second. So they were quite large, and so they were not only good for wearing, and a lot of the traveling was on horseback, and so that would protect you a little bit better, but also they were bed blankets. They slept under them at night, and so they were very practical.
They didn't wear them like the sarapes.
No, the term you want to use is poncho.
Poncho,
Yeah. So generally, no. We don't see many slits, although a lot of them are made in 2 pieces. They usually wore them more as wearing blankets rather than ponchos. A handful did. Okay. There's a handful of them, but usually not. That was a more Mexican thing. So here now, so they started adding a little bit of indigo blue to accent the bands. We talked a little about indigo yesterday, but it's a fadeless dye. It's a color-fast dye. And so the white wool was used to dye it blue. And so this is what a lot of these blankets are what we call 5-panel. You could divide the banded designs, and even when they get into bands and designs, they are 5-panel. There you go.
When were wider loops introduced? Because that isn't just a single piece.
Not till pretty late. And so, okay, the question was when were the wider looms developed in? And usually not. Although the loom is pretty large, mostly they wove a 2-foot wide piece out of it. And the reason they did that is because they could reach from one side of the textile they're weaving to the other side of the textile without having to move themselves. So mostly they were made in 2 panels, except the earlier banded ones. And with the banded ones, what they would do is they would stack their warps. They would put one set of warps up, and they'd put another set of warps right on top of it. And they could run their shuttle across the bottom set of warps, round the corner, and run it across the top. And in those pieces, which let me just see that one that we just had.
Mm-hmm. This one.
Yeah. And so when you see, hold it up and we'll show them. So when you see this, you can see this line down the middle. And that is where the warps were bundled. So after they would wrap it around where the warps and go back, they usually would have the center warps bundled like the outer warps, and so they could pull on it. And so, but you only get that. If you start using designs, you can't do that stacked warp system. So now here's a little fancier. And this one's made in 2 pieces, and this one's quite large. Let's go here this way. And so this one has, 2 shades of indigo blue used in it and beautiful brown. This one is also beautiful churro wool. And so the 2 panels, after you made 1 panel, you had to match it and make another panel to do it. And so this one is actually 6 panels, so the center would be down the back right here. And I won't put every one on, although I love to.
How many warps per inch generally?
That's a good question, but not nearly as high. Oh, the question. Her question was how many warps per inch? And so that varied a lot, but the Rio Grande blankets, they were heavier blankets. They're made for a warmer climate. And so you would get anywhere from 8 to 12, maybe.
Yeah, there's like 10 in this one.
Yeah, about 8 to 12 approximately. There are some really fine ones. Some of the really fine pieces can go higher, can go 12 to 15, but usually not more than that. Generally, it's a 5-to-1 ratio of warp to weft. So if you got 10 warps, you may have close to 50 wefts.
And when did you say the indigo dye process began?
When did it start being used?
Yeah.
Well, the Anasazi used indigo. So the trades were established from Mexico up into the Southwest before the Spanish ever arrived. But when I'm showing, I'm referring to them sort of stylistically. So it's the brown and white was the earliest, and then the indigo comes in. But that would have been probably around 1800 or so. You know, if I had to pick a date, that's probably the date I'd pick. So this is a really neat type of Rio Grande blanket. And all the early guys called this gold color here Brazil wood. Now, there were two wood dyes, Brazil wood and log wood, that were traded up into Santa Fe. And so we all called them Brazil wood until the Rio Grande book came out in 1979. And so they hired a guy from UCLA named Max Salzman to dye test all of the Brazil woods. No Brazil wood was found in one of them. So we don't know what that dye is. Now, I just had stuff tested for Davison and some of mine that are supposed to be Brazil wood. A guy named David Wenger, he's in Philadelphia now. He's a child disease scientist, and he has the proper equipment to do it. It's mostly what's called spectrophotometric analysis. And when we were doing this, I said, well, here's some more of those Brazil woods. And he goes, they're not Brazil wood. And I'm going, yeah, well, we've called them that for so many years, we just use the term. And so how did Brazil wood come about? It's not Brazil wood. I drive him crazy. He thinks that I didn't hear that they weren't really Brazil wood. So we really don't know what that dye is, but it's a beautiful golden dye. And it's not real color fast, but let's see, here we go. Am I kind of getting it okay? So, and this has a real nice sky blue, beautiful dark, and so this is nice churro wool too. So this was pulled out of a, where's Chris? Where did you get this? In a flea, it's some kind of a secondhand store?
Double take?
Yeah, double take. For how much?
80 bucks.
And she agreed to double her money. So, and it had a little restoration done to it, but it's a beautiful blanket. So anyway, so with the synthetic dyes were discovered in 1856 for silk, in 1857 for wool. And the English were working on it. A guy named Perkins was the first one that made the discoveries, but the people that really got the best leg up on the dyes were Germans. And so they were the ones that got most of the patents and held most of the dyes. And those were called aniline or coal tar synthetic dyes. And so they were a worldwide billion-dollar business because you used to have to do all this work to dye wool, and now you just had a packet, you could pour it in water and put a little hot water in there and dye it. And so it was really a very, very successful business. And if you wonder where the Germans got all the money to start 2 world wars, dyes. And so in World War I, we did not take their dye patents from them. We let them keep them. But after World War II, we said, nope, you lost all your dye patents, guys. So it's kind of funny that, World War would start with them by dye. So anyway, this is an early aniline dye, the red dye. It's the same type of blanket, not exactly like that one, but of most of the Brazil woods that we see. And so this blanket 5 or 10 years earlier by this weaver would have been had that golden Brazil wood dye, but the weaver preferred the aniline red in this one. So. Well, you know, the merinos were introduced into the Rio Grande Valley in 1859, okay? And that started what, you know, my mentor Joe Ben Wheat called the contamination period. Because sheep being sheep started doing what sheep do. And so through the 1860s, the contaminated merino, which was considered better wool in Spain, but it was better in the sense that if you had the right solvents to clean all the grease and things out of it, it was a nicer, shinier wool. But those solvents weren't available in the Southwest, so it really contaminated the wool and sort of ended up really destroying it. And so there's a whole people that are rebreeding this churro and this whole thing now, and they have become talk every year to them. And you know, I first was a little insulting about churro. It should be called reinvented churro because they're reinventing it now 100 years later. And so it doesn't have the wool of that the early pre-1859 stuff does. And so I'm kind of against it a little bit. So. Yes, cochineal was also, you know, was also used by the Aztecs, and they controlled, it was a big industry, and they controlled it. It was graded and everything like that. Now, cochineal is a little scale insect that lives on the nopal cactus. And basically, it's bug blood. It's carminic acid. And it was the second most valuable export out of the New World, second only to gold and silver, and almost as valuable as silver per pound. And so it produced the most brilliant red ever discovered by mankind. And it was just super brilliant. And so, you know, when the Moors, so madder was the dye of Europe, and it's a plant dye. And so when the Moors took over Spain in 600 or 700 AD, they brought a dye called lac, and it was a scale insect that's a relative of the cochineal. And so that became the rage of Europe, this lac. The discovery of the New World brought cochineal, and so it was the new rage of Europe, and it was beautiful. It was color fast and brilliant reds, and by changing the mordants, you could get to purples, you could get to pinks, you could get to all different shades of red. So this is the beginning of the next sort of style, developmental style of Rio Grande blanket. And so we call these, you know, this one doesn't really show the banded idea except the designs are in bands. But it's what we call banded in designs. And these little spot repeats. These are brown, these are blue, and these are cochineal red in this blanket. And so it's really a rare blanket. I just love it. I think it's fantastic. So anyway, this one gives us a little better idea of the concept of banded and designed. And so here's the old brown, blue, and white coming from the plain banded blankets. And so this one has the beautiful, come on, I thought we practiced this. So this is sort of the classic banded and designed. And so this just has little terrace designs that go down in it and kind of get the idea of what starts to happen. And so this was it was a conscious decision to design the blankets, but it was also kind of a development of style we started to see with them putting these bands in it. And this one has a beautiful sky indigo blue in it and beautiful brown and white. It's in nice condition. This is probably about 1850 or 60. I hope I look this good when I'm that old.
The serrated shapes are not in the earlier blankets. I wondered, is there some meaning to them, or is that just
Well,
shape?
first off, let me correct your use of that term. Serrated is angular. It's created on the loom by dropping or picking up every time they go across with the weft, they either drop or pick up a warp, and that creates a serrate. It's an angular design. As you see, this isn't angular. This is what we call terraced because it's stair-stepped. Okay. So terraced is the opposing word. Terraced was basically Navajo design. Serrate was Hispanic design. but all the weavers didn't read the book that told them that. And so it's not a hard, fast thing. So I'll show you, when we get to serrate, we will show you that. So here's another, this is a little more magnificent. We have a couple of these in the exhibition, but this is a more robust, I will say, banded and design blanket. And see here, we see the terracing, but see here is little tiny areas of serrate. And so again, you guys tired of me putting them on yet? Yeah, thanks. I don't need much encouraging, really. Pardon?
What's the history of it?
On this one?
Yeah.
Oh, God. I've had it 40 years.
Yeah. That's a good blanket.
Yeah, it's a really nice blanket. But yeah, I bought some of these so early, I just always don't remember. I do have records of some things, and I know, but, you know, I kind of fell in love with these 4 years ago, and I'll show you how sick it really is.
You paid 80, right?
Yeah. Now, look at this, kids. This is my Rio Grande collection. I have close to 400 of them. And that's what you get when you collect for 50 years. And so this is a book of them. And so, you know, I'm sort of getting older, kind of, you know, like all of us do. And so, you know, I'm looking for something to really do for them. I like them to see them go to a really good place. I'm not sure I'm wanting to give them all away, but I would probably make it a really nice gift or a really sweet deal if I could see them go to an institution where they could really be preserved, because it does represent a guy that went to every show and every auction and everything for 55 years to find all these things. So, okay, now this is a little newer. This is aniline dyes. This is the synthetic dyes, but it's still a good early piece, probably from about 1875. And here, go this way, so we want to look at the Velcro. But this is a really kind of a wonderful multi-panel design. So here's your serrate design used in this one.
Oh, the Star Wars TIE Fighters.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, and so so this is later, this is 1875, 85. I've come to kind of call these bubble gummers because they remind me of a bubble gum machine that has all the different colors in it, you know. This is, you know, when you live with these things, you think of all this crazy stuff. So they were pretty articulately done. You know, it wasn't haphazard. You see, they really did come together fairly nicely. And so they made beautiful decorative things, okay? Here we go. I'm going to have to stop putting every one on, huh?
Yes, you are.
All right, so now this gets into a really beautiful, elaborate banded and design piece with beautiful designs. Yeah, somewhere. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So, isn't that a beautiful one? And so that has great big terrace designs. This could be, that's Navajo design. And so this could have been done by a Navajo weaver. But that's for my slave blanket talk. I'll speak more authoritative on that later, but it's beautiful. It's a 5-panel design. Interestingly enough, the center panel is sort of reduced, and the 1, 2, and 4 and 5 panel are much more exaggerated. But beautiful. I bought this at Sotheby's years ago, and this has attached on the ends, Fred Harvey selvage. So this was bought by Fred Harvey Company late in the 19th century, early 20th century, and so they fixed up the ends before they sold it. And we'll show you another one of that has, you know, pretty good history. But this Fred Harvey selvage is pretty distinctive, and he was a big fan. Fred Harvey Company was a big fan of these Rio Grande blankets, so they handled a lot of them. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a distinction between weaving for people to wear and for burial?
Well, we don't really know specifically of burial blankets as such, you know. And I would think due to the practicality and the cost of them, they were not cheap blankets that these guys did. They're probably things that were more damaged and things that were maybe a little more commercial were used for burial. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, so. But, I mean, we're gonna bury it with it, you're obviously throwing it away. But in a lot of cases, they would want to honor the person and make them a nice blanket. So I'm sure every, you know, we're all kind of human beings, and these guys were too, and so that kind of every possibility you can imagine could have happened. So that's what I do for a living, is dream up all these possibilities. So we call these banded and designed. The next category we really go to are what we call Saltillo influenced. And so this is showing a lot of Saltillo influence. But the influence is really made up of terraced triangles, which appear Navajo design. And then it does have red bayeta in the center too. So this again could be a, you know, Navajo made blanket went off of a Rio Grande loom.
Let me show these guys that
So, try it on. Do I have to? No, this one I was going to do that just because when you start getting this much design, you can really see how cool they really could get. So, am I there yet? Not quite. Yeah.
You're good.
There you go. I'm good. So this is a pretty early blanket. This goes back with the wool and the design in this should go back to 1825, 1850 period. And this one, isn't that nice? Now this I got from Larry Frank, but I have to say I sold it to Larry Frank initially, so.
Got it back.
And got it back, yeah. After he died, I bought several things from his son and Ross. And so now we're getting into what we call Saltillo influence. And so they're borrowing, this is a good example, because they're borrowing Saltillo designs and they're blowing them up. They're like looking at them through microscopes and blowing them up and making them really big. And so here you see just serrate designs. Here, go that way with it. Here you see big serrate diamonds in indigo blue. And really how nice and perfectly this is woven. The design matches really nice. It's a beautiful, beautiful blanket. And there's a couple others of this style in the exhibition. This one didn't quite make the grade. But the red in the middle of this is a raveled material. It's a raveled, they like to call it flannel because it's an aniline, it's not a cochineal dye, and so it's a stupid word, I hate that term, but so, and I'll get more into that when we do the Navajo talk. Pardon? Golly gee. So much work. So much work. Have I gotta? Did I pay you to ask me that?
Is there a masseur in the audience?
Yeah, right. Well, I used to have this cute business card. Somebody sent me this steamer trunk decal. It was about this big one time. And it had a lady on it, and there was the wheel, what's the roulette kind of wheel on it, and it said on it, "Take a chance on an Indian blanket." And somebody sent it to me, and I looked at it, I said, "My God, that's my business card." So I had it for years. We bought the Trading Post. Oh. When we bought the Trading Post out on the reservation 30 years ago, I stopped using that card. I didn't want to be sort of politically incorrect. But it was the only business card I ever had. When I gave it to somebody, they would look at it and go, "Do you have another one of these?" So it was pretty handy for that. Does that kind of do it? I have it kind of straight. Guys, cool, huh? Well, you know, when I buy them, I think about how they're going to look on. I mean, it's not an accident that they look good. I'm also kind of fussy about condition. You don't see these in the condition like these. We're mostly looking at stuff maybe about 1850, 1860. And there's a lot of them not in such good condition, but I've been kind of fussy. Now, the next style of blanket that develops, and we don't know if it's always chronological or not, but basically is Saltillo style. And so that means they're not borrowing, they're not Saltillo, not Saltillo, yeah, Saltillo, where it has a Saltillo influence. These are really Saltillo style. So they have, great, I wish I could talk. They show the three distinct elements of the Saltillo style, which is the central diamond and then the field. And the border is really subtle on this. It's only a slight change from the rest of the field. One thing that the Rio Grande weavers did that kind of can tell you if it's a Rio Grande is they very seldom put end borders on, like what you see in Saltillos. They usually had banded end panels. And we don't know what rule book they were following to do that, but it's pretty consistent. And about 95% of all these blankets have banded end panels. And you can see this is made in two-piece, very carefully made. And so really nice the way they did the designs. Now this one came, I bought this about 2 or 3 years ago in Los Angeles out of a collection called the Robinson Collection. It was a huge collection, a few thousand objects. And Robinson had collected here in New Mexico. He was second generation. His mom collected first, and he inherited his mom's stuff, but they documented this stuff incredibly well. So everything had really fabulous history with it. And this is one of them. I bought several of the Rio Grande blankets. I bought most of the Rio Grande blankets out of the collection because they were a nice collection. Nice condition.
Yesterday you were talking about the guilds in Mexico.
Uh-huh.
You talked about the carders and the weavers
Right.
and the spinners, etc. While maybe we may not have had the guilds up here so sophisticated, were those done by different individuals?
Yeah, more.
Start to finish with one.
And that's a really good point, and I should have said something, but these are more individual, rather than being actually, there were professional weavers that did them, but it's more of a cottage industry craft in New Mexico rather than a production industry like what was done in Mexico. Couple questions, go ahead.
Did you say that the guy that got you started was Wally Prince?
Yes, did you know him?
He's my uncle.
No kidding. Well, tell him I'm still mad at him. No, Wally, he was from Zuni.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was from Zuni. I never saw him again. He started me on a road that's 55 years later now, and I never saw him again, but I remembered the name.
Wow.
So,
Wow, what a coincidence.
yeah, that's a coincidence. Is he still with us?
No, he died in 1979.
Wow.
No wonder I never saw him again. So that deal killed him. So my deal with him was about 77 or so. No, 1970. It was earlier than that. And he was a traveling trader. You're the first person that ever knew that name. And I didn't really use that name, but I did write one of my catalogs that's there on the storm pattern. I mentioned the name in the catalog that he started me out. So this is just a little better grade of Saltillo style. This is a beautiful one. And this came from what was called the Lorimer collection in Sotheby's. I bought this in 1991. And Fred Harvey Company sold this to a guy named Horace Lorimer. Now, Horace Lorimer owned the Saturday Evening Post. And they were big collectors of blankets. And this has Fred Harvey selvage. That selvage on the end is Fred Harvey selvage. And there's a little bit of Fred Harvey repair in it, but the red is the Bayetta, and then the brown, blue, and white are all hand spun, the blue being indigo. Beautiful, huh? This one I was going to put on. Take a chance on an Indian blanket, Yep. Elvis is in the house. There you go. How are we doing? Oh, really? Holy cow, I'm going to slow down. So anyway, with these are all, you know, native hand-spun wool from New Mexico. But, you know, after the discovery of the synthetic dyes and the discovery of commercial yarns, making plied yarns, a lot of those yarns started coming into New Mexico because it was a weaving area. And so this is a Saltillo style that's made out of what were called Germantown yarns. Now they're all called Germantown, but basically Germantown is in Philadelphia, and several mills were set up to produce yarns, and that happens to be at the end of when the Navajo internment at Bosque Redondo, the U.S. government, that's for my next talk, by the way, but the U.S. government bought, you know, thousands of pounds of yarn to give to the Navajo because we destroyed all their sheep. So when they decided to let the Navajos go in 1868, they started giving them literally thousands of pounds of Germantown yarns. And they came in a variety of aniline colors. And so in both for the Navajo and for the Hispanic, it became a color splash. It's the first time they had access to all these colors. And so that shows strong Hispanics, you know, strong Saltillo style with the pattern border. It doesn't have a real distinct central diamond, but it has what we call a diagonal grid field. Of course, as I said, most Rio Grandes will have banded end panels.
You were thinking about trying that one on too, right?
Was I? You have $1. Since we have plenty of time and we're enjoying this, they're so beautiful on it. I'm glad that, you know, that we put several of them on the mannequins in the show because people really get an idea that they're not just, you know, flat innate objects, but they're kind of made. You want to try it on?
That one's my favorite.
That's your favorite, huh? You like, is there something about the color?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh, okay, I thought so.
Do you know why the color changed on the bottom there?
Like here?
No.
Like here?
And then
That's what
a
I
little-
thought.
And then a little
Here?
further along on the border.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Well, those were just what were called dye lot changes because they would dye a color. And the weaver that would have gotten the yarn, it could have already been a different color, but it might have been the exact same color, you know, and just because of the way the dye lot done it, the effective wear and use affected the color. So, you know, I mean, I know people that think of great stories why this does this and things, but they have better imaginations than I do. I'm more plant, I think it's, and you see that a lot with the Germantown yarns, the just change in dye lots. And so they didn't quite get enough yarn to get a single blanket, so they had to kind of build it in. Sometimes you see it really radical in pieces, you know, almost unattractive. But
You see it in beadwork too.
yeah.
Little change of shade in beadwork.
So now this is an interesting yarn because this is called a variegated yarn, and that's a spot dyed yarn. So if you stretch that yarn out, it would go from the lightest color through the medium color to the darkest color and then reverse back again. It's called the variegated. And the silk serape that's in the show is the incredible example of the variegated yarns.
You want to get to the culture and everything.
Yeah. So, anyway, I ran into the floor here. I have to hurry up a little bit so we don't go over. But anyway, here, this is something that develops around 1875 or 1880. And this is the Saltillo style, but they've incorporated the 8-pointed star. And so there's a lot of theories where that came from. It all of a sudden pops up in the weaving. And so one theory is that as the natives were wearing all their blankets and the Spanish were wearing their blankets, all of a sudden there's a lot of Anglos coming in. And so they bring, what they do is quilts. And so the quilt star is really common. The most common design in a quilt is a star, also a coverlet. And so But, you know, so some of them were supposedly worn, but they might have just been, you know, washed and hang up on the line and they saw the design. And that design mostly is now credited, it's called the Vallero Star, and it's credited, we have a blanket in the show that was done by, oh, hi. and so her great-grandmother, and that's their blanket, that's their great-grandmother's blankets, and it's in the chapel there. Yeah. And they're both very famous New Mexican craftsmen, and we're really proud. Did you get to the show and see the blanket yet? You haven't? Okay. Well, after the show, we'll go over and look at it. So here is the style. Now, this is Germantown yarn. Do you know if your great-grandmother ever wove with Germantown yarns or mostly hand-spun?
I don't know.
Yeah. I meant to ask you that question when I picked up the blanket for the show the other day. So her great-grandmother was named Patricia Montoya. She lived in El Valle, right? She was from
El Valle. That's where the Vallero comes from.
So that's
For
why they
El
call
Valle.
it Vallero Star.
So she
right?
was Patricia Montoya Roybal.
Roybal, that's right, yeah. And so she was really kind enough to loan us a beautiful example. So here's another one of her grandmother's style, but this is a Germantown example of it here. And so it's the 5-star style. And the one that we have in the show is hand spun, but we know that that actually came from her. And so they're right up above Chimayo, Truchas, Trompas, and El Valle kind of together there, where these were done. But beautiful. Now, Joe Ben-Weed, who was my mentor and kind of hero in Navajo weaving, called it the last hurrah of Rio Grande weaving.
That's a good expression.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. So we have a few other things. Now, between around 1880 and 1900, the Rio Grande tradition was kind of in a state of flux. There was no distinctive style. There was a lot of styles taken from everywhere. So there was a lot of things done and experimented and tried in that period. And so there's a lot of stuff. Now, I call them pre-Chimayo textiles. About 1900, Chimayo develops as a very distinctive style that we see. But so here is one blanket that I could call pre-Chimayo. And there was a group of these. These were done a little smaller than most of the blankets, but it still has some Saltillo influence and really nice coloration. And it made a nice shawl. Now watch this. Turn around for a second. This one fits you better. So anyway, Chimayo, here is a classic Chimayo. Style develops around 1900. And they were the kind of the leftover of the Hispanic weavers in New Mexico. And that was really probably the best weaving village. And here's just a real fun one here. So it's got a critter on it, and it's got some oxen carts and everything, so it's
Ducks and donkeys.
yeah. Isn't that a fun one?
So where do the Bazon brothers fit into this scenario?
I skipped them on the list. So it's Bazan, by the way. But anyway, in about 1800 or so, you know, and I don't think they're right about how and why they did this, but you know, the New Mexicans got tired of sending all their stuff, you know, thousands of blankets a year. There's one report in 1840 that 40,000 blankets were sent from New Mexico to Mexico. I think that's not a good fact. I think somebody said it, somebody repeated it. It's in the Rio Grande book is supposedly a fact. I don't think that's right. You did the math on how many weavers there had to be, how many blankets they had to make. It's not, but it has been I think the idea was, though, a tremendous amount of blankets were sent from New Mexico to Mexico. And I've often said that New Mexico was really just a giant weaving factory, you know, and so there was lots of textiles made. Probably not 40,000 enough to be exported, but it could have been 10,000 or something. It could have been, huge numbers. And so those numbers around 1800 started to really diminish. And it was basically because the weavers didn't want to send all their stuff for tribute down to Mexico City, was what I think really happens. And so the Viceroy in Mexico City gets concerned about the weaving going downhill, and there was other crafts that were doing the same thing too. So he hires 2 weavers that were called the Bazan brothers, and they sent them up here. I think they arrived in 1807, and their purpose was to improve the weaving quality and try to get the weaving going back up again. And so that's where they come into the picture. We really don't have much information about what they did. They did weaving classes and they did do things, but it's really, nothing was really recorded too much about them. But they are a big part. I should have gone, when I was talking about history, gone to that. And so one thing I wanted to put in the exhibit that we didn't get into the exhibit is I have the proclamation, a copy of the original proclamation from 1805, soliciting weavers to go to New Mexico, put out by the Viceroy in Mexico City. So, shucks. Next, there you go. So anyway, does that answer the question that you had? Okay, yeah. But so we don't know what they did, and they did stay for quite a while, and it's felt that they brought the Saltillo influence to the Rio Grande Valley there, and so the reason a lot of Saltillos. But they weren't really Saltillo weavers as such. We don't have any evidence of that. And I think it was more just timing that they started doing that. But they could have. I'm not going to say they definitely didn't, but they certainly could have. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if the Bazan brothers were actually weavers?
Oh, yeah. They're definitely master weavers from Mexico.
So the really elaborate early Saltillo-style ones, were those intended to be exported to Mexico, or were those intended for local sale?
Could be both. You know, the records weren't really well kept, and so we just, that's a really good questions. I lay awake asleep at night. Awake at night trying to figure, I wonder if they did that. But no, but but the Saltillo, they're warm. That's a warm climate down there, and these are warm blankets. And so they're really specifically made for it's really New Mexico specific. So anyway, let's see. Couple things here. Now, opening in 1934 in Santa Fe was a place that was right where the shed is now, was called the Native Market. And it was opened by Palahimo and Curtin family. And Palahimo is who gave Rancho de las Golondrinas to the state. So they were very much into Hispanic crafts and stuff. It was basically a big open air market. And they did metalwork, leatherwork, woodwork, weaving, and all things. And it's a funny name, the Native Market. But what they meant is Native New Mexican, not Native Indian. And so this is a Native Market blanket here. It's a copy of a designed Brazil wood blanket. This is Native Market. So they were very, very high quality work. So coming close to World War II, the Native Market bought the corner of Old Santa Fe Trail and Paseo de Peralta, where the Capitol now is. And so they opened a huge operation there. It was really huge. There's books written on it. You can get pictures of this Native Market. It was really cool. It was basically an open air market where the craftspeople worked outside and kind of shedded things. And World War II killed it. Went out of business.
Was this woven on a wider?
Yeah, it's woven on is one piece loom. So the loom had to be wider, right? Yeah.
Is it like a form harness?
Well, I imagine, I'm not a weaver, so I thought the harnesses had more to do with the number of warps and the manipulation of the kind of weave you could get. So that's...
They wouldn't let enough people come down from Los Alamos?
Yeah, I guess not. So this is a Brazil wood. Okay, and here's another native market blanket. I have a nice collection, and we do have one in the exhibition. But with all the great blankets in there, it kind of gets sidewashed. But this is a beautiful banded and designed Rio. They copied early Rio Grande blankets. So here's a great copy of one right here. That's native market. You've seen many of these? Yeah. It didn't last that long, so I don't think it did. I found my first one still had a native market tag on it, and so I thought, what the hell? And so before I sold it, at that time I took the tag off, so I kept the tag.
Kathy wanted to know a question.
How do you know it was native? Well, you just told me.
The materials, it's what's called roving, the materials it's made out of, and basically the quality of the design. Okay. Once you kind of see them, they fit kind of into a certain category, yeah. And I have about 10 of them in my collection, of mostly different styles. Like I said, there is one in the show. They're beautifully made. So anyway, I got just a couple more things. I know we're running out of time. And we have a couple of these in the exhibition. This is a New Mexican colcha. And colcha comes from the couching stitch that it's used. It's an embroidery. It's a bedspread. Here, take that. Okay. Oh, okay, we're there. So this is a really wonderful floral one. This came off our bed this morning. And we loaned things last year to the Nevada State Museum, which we do loan a lot. And the curator, I let the curator walk through a house and take whatever he wanted. And he walked in and he said, "You're using a colcha as a bedspread?" I'm going, "Well, yeah, that's what they were." He goes, "Can I borrow that one?" And so we haven't had it for 6 months, and we just got it back. But I bought this. I guess it's a kind of fun story to tell. When Peter Siebert was director of the Millicent Rogers Museum, he did the show. He got a bunch of dealers together, and we all set up our little booths in the show and around the museum, actually in the museum. And I was in a corner. I brought a Navajo weaver, and they did demonstrating and stuff. And right out from me was, never forget who it was, Jan and
Lane Coulter.
Lane Coulter and Jan Brooks were right out from me. And some lady walked in with this one, a bag, walked right by them and walked right into my booth and pulled it out and sold it to me. So I was really happy that day. They weren't. Because they were like me and liked a lot of the nice things. But it's a beautiful floral example.
Why do you think she walked up to you?
I don't know.
Let's hear the story.
I don't know. So
She
what?
wanted to get one of your cards.
That's what it was, yeah. So I traded her the card for the blanket.
There you go.
So anyway, this is made out of what's called sabanilla, which is early New Mexican-made cloth. And I don't know if this one here. Let's just show the back. We can actually see if we can see it's patched. A lot of times you can see it's just pieces of really early cloth. It could go back to 18th century cloth, and it's patched together. You can see a patch right here, but sometimes it's little squares and everything, and they'll patch together, and then they would completely embroider it.
What's the date?
What's that?
The date for this?
Well, we collect these, and they're the most confusing date in the world because there's none of them, literally none of them have real good documentation because they were 18th century. There's an 18th century one in the museum show now. And so they did them all during the 19th century. And then there was a guy named Elmer Shoup who lived here in Santa Fe, and he was married to a lady by the last name of Graves. And in the early 20th century, they started redoing them. And they were taking apart old blankets and redoing them. And so few of them are documented, I'm still not exactly sure whether they're 19th century or early 20th century. I mean, I'd like to think I know, but I really don't. So I'm really anxiously looking for documented examples of those, but they just don't seem to have the history. And so Elmer and his wife sold them as old. And they would take apart old Rio Grande blankets with bright colors, and they'd use that to embroider them. And so they were kind of fakes. And when Harry Mira was studying all the different types of textiles, he wrote in one of his memoirs that he didn't do colches because he wasn't sure what were real and what were fake. So he never did any information about them. So anyway, this is a real, I have two really rare Rio Grande textiles. This is all hand spun wool, aniline dyed, and then after they spun the wool and dyed it, it's crocheted. And so this is an early probably late 19th century Rio Grande crocheted blanket, and they did it in two pieces. Now, I was up at University of Colorado Museum visiting my mentor, Joe Ben Wheat, one day, and he always, he thought I was a young whippersnapper, because I'd say, oh, I had one of those and this and that. So he takes me to kind of one of his, and he kept everything in these big drawers, like map drawers. And he said, I got something you've never seen before. I said, oh, I'd really like to see it. He has an exact duplicate to this. And I got this out of a really famous collection of a guy named Alfred Barton in Coral Gable, Florida. And it was part of the University of Miami collection. He left his things there. And so I traded them a Saltillo, and they let me go through their textiles, but they wouldn't trade me anything that had ever been published. So it had to be something not published. And so I got several really nice textiles out of Barton collection, and he was really one of the great, great collectors. But I'd never seen another one. But it's all hand spun, except here's another one. Oh. So, yeah, they're all over the place. So this one came from, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right because my Spanish is terrible, Cahelian Lakes. You know where that is? Yeah, I knew I pronounced it wrong. But this one came up, and there's a lady that had that shop in Espanola, corner of this and that, and she bought it up there out of a Hispanic family, but it's another one. And this one, they crocheted just small panels and sewed them together, so it's not made the same way. But pretty cool, huh? This is the only two of them I've ever seen complete, except Joe Ben Wheat had one.
Hand spun too.
What?
It's all hand spun too.
Yeah, it's all hand spun. Hand spun, probably aniline dyed. So let's see. Now, this is just my favorite weaver, of course. But we have one of these in the show, and this is made by. Oh well. Crash. That lovely lady sitting right over there, can you put your hand up so we know who you are? Come on, now I want you to stand up. I'm really going to embarrass you. She wove this. We have one of her examples. Her name's Carla Bogdanoff. Did I say that right? Close enough. Okay, good. And she made this, and she makes the most beautiful emulations. I hate to use the word copy because you're just so great. But this is a copy of a 1850 or so Rio Grande blanket that she wove. Isn't that beautiful? And we have one of hers in the show that is her newest one. Yay! I don't think I've embarrassed you quite enough yet. But anyway, we have one of hers in the show too. We have one by the Trujillo family from Chimayo and one by the Ortega family from Chimayo. Plus, of course, your great-grandmother's piece too. But Carla, she knocks them dead. And her husband, Chris, who's sitting next to her, they're kind of a little combination. You know, Chris tells her what to do and she does it. No, they work together, and they really try to look at early blankets and really try to create them, and they're the most amazing. And I had this on the floor of my room one time, and so if there is such a thing as a famous Indian art dealer, which I don't know about that really. But anyway, he was at my house, and he looked at this thing on the floor, and he said, wow, that's beautiful. I said, it's really nice. He goes, I'll give you $15,000 for it. And I'm going, no, you won't. He goes, why not? I says, because it's brand new. He was totally convinced. Josh Baer. Yeah, Josh totally thought this was a 19th century Rio Grande. Yeah, well, yes, I agree.
Exactly.
But, so anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed looking at all the blankets. You're welcome to come up and fondle them.